What's up, guys? Welcome to this very awesome piece of bonus content that I have put together for you. I am your boy Seth Grimes, and today we are going to be diving into ranking all of the top pro wrestling podcasts that are out there today, the active ones, current as of this recording. This is something I thought would be really fun to do. I don't know if you guys, through your YouTube scrolling, have come across these tier rankings that everybody's doing them. They do them. A lot of these review channels will do the tier rankings for movies and books and that kind of thing, video games. So I thought it would be fun to do a ranking because I do host the Pro Wrestling podcast, and I am an aficionado, a podcast journalist, if you will, in all things pro wrestling podcasts. I thought it would be fun to rank the top pro wrestling podcasts in existence. Now, certainly this will not be a complete list. There's so many pro wrestling podcasts out there that, this would be almost impossible without leaving somebody out. But what I kind of went through to pick the list, I have a list of 30. So we're going to go through the top 30. And this list was pretty much just compiled out of when I do the graphics for the thumbnails for my podcast. If you've noticed for the Pro Wrestling podcast, if I take a clip from, say, Fightful, Sean Ross Sapp's doing an interview with somebody, I will post a picture. I'll put a picture of that podcast cover in my thumbnail to kind of just give credit and show where the sample's from and stuff. So I basically just went through my folder for my graphic design of the podcast covers that I use for the thumbnails. And so these are going to be at least the most active and newsworthy podcasts. Certainly, like I said, we're going to miss some. This is not going to be a complete list, but this should be a pretty dope list, if I do say so myself. So with that said, let's jump on over and take a look here and see where we're at. All right, so we are popping on over to the chart here, the tier chart. We have right at the bottom, we got the Drizzling Shits. All right, this is going to be the worst of the worst. This is where a god-awful podcast, a bastardized, should have never existed to begin with, a Drizzling Shits will go here. And to be honest with you, I don't know that there will be any that are the complete Drizzling Shits, you know. I didn't go through and pre-plan any of these, so we're going to do it completely on the fly. That'll be kind of the fun of it. So I don't know who's going to land where or how that's going to go, and that could change if I redid this tomorrow. I might have a different opinion. But the Drizzling Shits will be the absolute worst that you can do. Jobber will be the next. So they're not the Drizzling Shits, but they're low, you know. They're jobbers. They're jerking the curtain. They're low levels. These are going to be the podcasts that are just kind of there. They're worth listening to every now and then, but they're not really going to give you much. Mid. You could take this as a mid card, if you will, or you could just take it as, just mid, you know, if we're taking the MJF approach to it. Either way, mid should fall in that example. Neither good or bad, just kind of mid. We got Top Guys. Top Guys is going to give you the, this is going to be your top tier, basically. These are your heavy hitters in the podcast world. Not the best podcast per se, but certainly up there in the conversation. My hat keeps bumping the goddamn microphone. And then finally, we got GOAT. GOAT tier is exactly what it is. This is going to be the greatest podcast or podcasts of all time as they exist currently. So let's just dive right in. This is going to be fun. I'm excited to do this, actually. I'm probably going to do multiple now that I've figured out this whole tier ranking gimmick that's so popular on YouTube right now. I'll probably do others, outside of the podcast. I think we'll jump into other types of wrestling content. We'll do some fun stuff. Let's dive in here. These are in no order as far as I can tell. These were just randomly dumped in. All right, so let's go with the What Culture Wrestling. That's what that says, right? Yeah. What Culture Wrestling. This show, these guys, there's multiple people that do the What Culture Wrestling. I can't even think of their names off the top of my head. I just used a clip from them recently. But what was like Eric Wilborn, right? I'm Eric Wilborn. That was like a southern accent when it should have been a British accent. They're two blokes from over in Britain. They do a hell of a job. They're good at like recapping the news and stuff. So if you miss something, they'll kind of go over what's in the news. They're not like groundbreaking or anything like that. I don't know that like if we're looking at mid-carder, that means this could possibly get a run for the Intercontinental title, and I just don't know that it's there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead. Oops. All right. We're going to go ahead and we're going to put... Is it G.O.A.T? Top guys, mid? We're going to put them in at jobber. I think they're jobbers. You know, when you got Drizzling Shits, jobbers, they're not getting a run for the Intercontinental title. Let's put it that way, right? So let's see. What do we got next? We got Booker T's Hall of Fame. Oh, my. If you've been following the cast lately, the cast as I call it, I like to call it the cast, the Pro Wrestling Podcast. That's my show that I do. You know that I've been critical of Booker T lately. He's very outspoken against AEW, and then he likes to pretend that he's not, right? So he likes to like... he'll actually go back and address it. He's like, everybody says I take shots at AEW. Like, he takes so many shots at AEW that he gets called out for it, and then he goes back on his show. But I mean, and then tries to backpedal. You know, I don't take shots at AEW. Always goes back to I got kids. You know, the people that I train. That got a couple of them got jobs there, and I want to get a couple of them jobs there. So he kind of plays it from that angle, like, I'm happy they exist because then, you know, my people can get work. But he buries them every chance he gets, and I think, you know, he's still under contract with WWE. So I mean, it would stand to reason that he's going to put over the home team, right, and kind of give big ups to everything that they do and kind of knock AEW subtly when he gets his chances to. And if you go in and listen, you'll know that, I mean, I'm not crazy here. I'm not just fanboying for AEW or just making shit up here. You go in and listen, and he's much more critical of the AEW product than he is WWE. Now look, maybe he just appreciates AEW more than, or WWE more than he does AEW. You know, he works there. He likes that style, perhaps. Who knows? But I feel like when he's partisan, and I also feel like for how old he is, he's what, like a 50-some-year-old man, 51, I think he is-ish. You know, he talks about fighting a lot in there, you know, like, you're going to talk shit about me, we can handle my shit in the streets. Well, some would look at that as, yeah, you don't fuck with Booker, that's commendable. I kind of look at it like, why do you still got to, like, flex and defend your manhood and your status and your, you know what I mean? Like, you know, like you host a podcast where you're going to talk smack about people, and in turn, those people are going to talk smack back, and you don't need to always like, well, we can meet somewhere and fucking fight about it. Like, dude, you're on a talk show, you know, like, I don't know. Booker T's got a lot of gems. He's a smart guy. He's been around the block. He's wise. I respect him. I do. I just think he's partisan, and I think he's passive aggressively takes shots and then gets defensive when those shots come back. So for those, I don't think he does. He's an entertaining show though. Okay, so if you agree with him, let's go on the flip side of that for a minute. Let's think it through, because like if you're an anti Cornette person, and yes, I'm smoking while I'm doing a YouTube video. Sue me. I got shit to do after this. So I'm going to do it all at the same time. Plus, we're kicking back. We're having a good time. We're just enjoying this here. Okay, I'm kind of dilly-dallying on this Booker T decision here. Let's make a fucking decision. We're going to go mid. We're going to go mid because I can't decide. He's not a top-tier guy. So we can rule out top and GOAT for sure. But I can't say his show is a jobber-level show because he's smart enough and he drops enough nuggets of knowledge and you know, his wiseness. I'm trying to think of a better word, but because wiseness is not a word, but his wiseness to the business makes him worth a listen, even if you disagree with him. Kind of like Cornette. But Booker T is much more intolerable, in my opinion. Cornette's entertaining. Spoiler. All right, so excuse me. I barely listen to this, but every once in a while, Vicky Guerrero. This is Vicky Guerrero's podcast. Her quality from time to time is sounds like she's standing in front of an air conditioner with the refrigerator running and the somebody cutting the grass in the background, and she's yelling it from across the room. So her audio quality is not always top tier. Not to say that mine's super uber professional, and even like a Jericho podcast has bad audio from time to time. These guys are getting their interviews backstage in the locker room, so there's gonna be audio issues from time to time, so I can't hold that against her completely. And she gets good interviews from time to time. I think last time I covered her, she had Izzy on, and you don't really see Izzy do a lot of like interviews, especially in the podcast circuit. She's an interviewer now, but by the way, try these Shine Waters. This berry one's not that good, but it's kind of just berry, you know, it's a generic berry. They got like a coconut lime that's fucking fire. I should have loaded up on those. These are like 4 for $5, so I tried them. They're not bad. So Vicky gets good guests, and you know what? Like, her audio sucks, and she's not that great of an interviewer either. It's very softball questions. It's very, so tell me about how you got into the business. That must have been so exciting for you. She doesn't really like get into it. You know what I mean? So I'm going to put her at jobber level. Borderline drizzling shits, but I don't want to do that to Vicky because I like Vicky, and she has good guests on from time to time, and there's little insightful nuggets in there. So like, I don't even know if you'd want to subscribe to that one, but it's worth like peeking in, I guess, from time to time and just see if she has a cool guest. 83 weeks. Here we go. So if I was going on and on about Booker T being critical of AEW, Bischoff is very critical of AEW. And I think most of it's for shtick, but not always. Bischoff, he doesn't hold back. He's so outspoken on his podcast. I think a lot of it is shtick. It's the controversy creates cash thing. The more that he says controversial things that are going to get headlines, like going to get picked up on by me, for example, where I'm going to be like, hey, Bischoff said this crazy shit on his podcast this week. He's really good at that. So I think part of that is his shtick. That's his gimmick. He's controversial, Eric Bischoff. So I think part of that's on purpose. The other part is he just doesn't really have a filter. He doesn't him and haw on his podcast. He doesn't, he's asked about somebody. He's not going to beat around the bush and politic it Just he's going to say how he feels about everything. The bad parts is that he's so long-winded. Like, even just trying to get samples, like when I do want to cover his show and there's samples, like I'm trying to pull, I try not to take any more than like a minute tops from any podcast, even though it falls under the Fair Use Act where I can use those clips to review them and do commentary on them and stuff. I still, want, the idea is to just kind of give you a little teaser, and then, you want to go listen to the full show. Bischoff's basically impossible to take a soundbite from. He doesn't speak in sound bites. He speaks in novellas. You know what I mean? So he can get a little bit boring. Those 3-hour Conrad podcasts, where half of them are ads. It's a bit much. So I honestly do not listen to the Conrad podcasts as much as I used to. Just because, goddamn, you only got so much time in a day, in a week, or whatever. So, but I mean, Eric's been around. It's been around a long time. Has it been around? I think the podcast itself has probably lasted 83 weeks by now. You know what? I'm going to put Eric Bischoff at a top guy. I think it's one that you're definitely going to want to subscribe to and at least check in with periodically. It's worth a listen once a month at the very least. You know what I mean? It's certainly not a mid-carder, but it's not the GOAT. Bischoff, he's an acquired taste. You got to really put in some effort to want to listen to this man speak. All right, let's go. Talk is Jericho. I don't know that I can even I don't know that there's a lot of debate to this. Jericho can be a little bit divisive at times to some people, I think, nowadays. But I don't think there's any disputing that he's, at least in my opinion, and maybe you can pitch a different argument. I'm going to lose this hat because it keeps bumping into my goddamn microphone and it's driving me nutty. Jericho's a GOAT, in my opinion. I don't think you can do much better than Chris Jericho's podcast. Just his variety, he does he's got something for everybody, right? Because for example, I'm not into the music side of it. When he does metal guests and stuff like that, I could care less. I love to listen for the wrestling ones, and I love to listen for the paranormal ones. He does a lot of the paranormal type stuff, or conspiracy stuff, or UFOs, or all that wild stuff that he likes to talk about too. That's interesting to me, and I like that he does that. And Jericho's so well-rounded. He can cover any topic. He can interview any person. He can, his wrestling interviews are always they're way more than surface level. At times they can be oh, you left WWE, come on my podcast and spill all the dirt about why you hated WWE. It's like the therapy session, the exit counseling, if you will, from WWE. But goddamn, you can't really find any flaws. You can find episodes that you don't like, and you can say what you will about Jericho himself at times, but I mean, if you're going to listen to a podcast, he is worth listening to every week, twice a week, if you like, All right. AEW Unrestricted. This is actually a really fun podcast. WWE has something similar in After the Bell. We'll get to that one here, as you can see in a couple minutes. AEW Unrestricted is a very fun podcast. Tony and Aubrey, first of all, just have great chemistry. Tony's a great host in general. Aubrey's come a long, long way. She's gotten very good. It's funny because when the show first started, I noticed right away that Aubrey was kind of a big mouth, and she talked over everybody a lot too, but she fixed it very quickly. So I don't know if somebody coached her, or she just watched it back, or a mix of both. I'm sure Tony helped her along, but those two, they're great hosts at this point. They have good fun chemistry. They're just raw. It is unrestricted, so they don't try to stay in any kind of character, or they don't try to be super professional with themselves or anything like that. You know, they're just laid back. They're having fun. They're cursing. They're talking shit with each other a lot of times. So good chemistry there. And their guests, like, their questions don't go too deep, but they can at times. Depends on how much the guest wants to open up. But they tend to be more surface level questions and stuff. And it's always like an AEW talent that they're talking to. And then they take a lot of fan questions too. Dang, they're at least mid-card, if not top guys, in my opinion. For me, let's go ahead and... I'm torn between mid and top. What are you guys thinking? You're thinking one in your heads right now. So if top tier is like a must listen every week, let's go mid, because some AEWs are skippable. You know, they have some people on that you just don't give a shit, you know, boring stooge face. But they will have really good ones on too. Like, no doubt, Claudio is going to be on there. They usually, like, him and Talk as Jericho have him on too. They always like to do, both of them like to do the new signee of the week in AEW, you know. That was a tough one. It could be a top tier. It could be a top guys. I mean, it's worth subscribing to and seeing who's on. You don't need to listen every week. Some guests are going to be skippable, like I said, and I think that's what makes it mid. Just mid. Be cool if you could put like graphics on these where the mid is and just put MJF's face saying mid. Next is Arn. I really liked Arn's podcast before he switched to like the old school Arn's life story. Him and Conrad, they actually had good. Arn can be boring at times too, because he is a very dry old man, but he's smart. He's quick-witted, and he is hipper to current everything, I guess. There's no real way, like, he's up to date, I guess, is what you could say. So like he they would do deep dives on a lot of WWE stuff, like when he was an agent backstage and that kind of stuff. So they covered a lot of big WWE pay-per-views, and I really liked it. It was a good format, and it was good one to soak up information, not necessarily to be entertained. Like, when like Conrad started, him and Bruce have a really fun banter between the two of them, a good chemistry where they play off each other. Conrad also has that with Tony Schiavone. But then some of them are more dry, like with Eric and Arn and stuff. They're a little bit more stale. So, but Arn, after that, they switched to, for whatever reason, they switched to a format where Arn was just gonna go back and cover like the old times and shit, like the 80s, early 80s, Crockett and fucking Arn's career specifically. And to me, like, when it stepped away from like covering like Backlash 2013 and just a random ass, like, there's a lot of good tidbits in the backstage stuff, because for example, like when you listen to like Bruce Pritchard's podcast, right? You get a lot of that backstage WWE shit. Well, when he wasn't in WWE, Arn was. So they're able to cover a lot of those pay-per-views and events that they would normally have gotten to with Bruce. They, as in Conrad, would have normally gotten to with Bruce. He was able to cover them with Arn. Long story short, Arn's podcast switched its topic, and I don't really care anymore. I would actually put, it feels disrespectful to Arn. I can't do that though. I did that with Vicky to an extent, but I'll listen to Vicky's. I won't listen to Arn. I'm going to go Drizzling Shits. And I'll say before he switched, it would have been a mid. It was good. So you can still go back and listen to those in his back catalog. They're evergreen and they're not covering current event news. So, go back and listen to the back catalog stuff. But anything nowadays where he's just covering the fucking good old days and Crockett, unless you come from that era, Moving on. After the Bell, Corey Graves. I gotta throw this as a top guy. I really do. I don't even listen to it every week, but I'm not a huge WWE fan, so I don't get into a lot of... Half the show is spent talking about the kind of in kayfabe, talking in storyline, basically, about the product, which to me is lame. Why would I want to listen to, it's like those old like studio shows that they used to do where they would just tell the story, here's what's going on and here's how we got to this point and I'm excited to see it. Ooh, I can't wait. It's going to be great at Money in the Bank. So it's a lot of that shit, but then he does the interviews on the back half and some of them are very skippable, like I said with the AEW one. But just as much, he gets really top tier talents. Corey and Vic Joseph. Vic's on every week with him as well. Corey Graves and Vic Joseph, they'll talk back and forth about the wrestling crap and then they'll interview somebody, and sometimes they'll get some really good ones on there. And when they do, they do go into like a deep dive, they do kind of do more than just scratch the surface. And how'd you get into the wrestling business? They'll address things that are being said online or whatever, it does get a little bit more real. I would almost say it's mid. Actually, can I change it? I think I want to change it. I don't know if it's top guy territory now that I'm thinking about it, because I'm almost talking. It's kind of the same concept of the AEW one. They're 1-1, except for Corey's kayfabe bullshit. I don't like the storyline telling, but I do like they get some really damn good interviews and random ones too. You guys, if you listen to my podcast, I plug a book that I wrote about the Gathering of the Juggalos. He had the Insane Clown Posse on just randomly one time and he was marking out for them and saying he wanted to go to a gathering and stuff. So cheap plug for my book. But like that kind of stuff makes it a fun podcast. So it's worth listening to, or at least checking in with, like I said with AEW, see what's on. Oh, let's see here. Busted Open. This is just like a podcast that gets made out of their radio show, however long they're on the Sirius satellite network. I think maybe they do like a 3-hour show or whatever. And they kind of whittle that down to like a best of for a podcast. If they have like an interview, that's what's going to be on the podcast. That kind of stuff. So, but when they do, this is Dave LaGreca. If you haven't listened to Busted Open at all, it's great. Dave LaGreca is an older gentleman, late 40s, 50s probably. But he's, a radio guy and he's a wrestling fan. And he started this wrestling show on the Sirius radio long before all these wrestling podcasts became a thing. Like he was doing a wrestling radio show, and just by being consistent and being good all these years, he's really built it up into something it's listened to by a shit ton of people. And then he's got co-hosts. Bully Ray's on there, Tommy Dreamer, Mark Henry. I think Thunder Rosa jumps in now from time to time, and Mickey James. They get really good interviews. LaGreca won't go too deep, but Bully will. LaGreca's a fanboy, so he's gonna play softball with everybody, and just put them over and shit. But if somebody does an interview with Bully will put the screws to him a little bit. Mark Henry, once in a while, he can be a little bit more deeper on the interview. Tommy Dreamer's pretty surface level too. He's kind of just puts everybody over and just gives them a nice powder puff. But yeah, if you catch an interview with Bully Ray, it's a little more interesting and dynamic, I would say, because he'll ask the tougher questions, But yeah, all in all, they get a lot of good interviews and they're fun listens. So I would actually put Busted Open as a top guys. They've been doing their thing for a long time and they're that good for a reason. All right. Wrestling. Rasslin. That's Wrestling with Brandon Walker for the Barstool Wrestling Network or Barstool Sports Network. Brandon Walker is great. He's funny as hell. He's an entertaining character and host. He's got a goofy like a goofy self-deprecating personality. You know, he always calls himself fat and he's a hick and a hillbilly and whatever. But he'll fuck with wrestlers too. He asks some really awkward questions and but that's the genius of him. You know, he makes the show awkward and it just like if you didn't know that it was his shtick and how good he actually is, you would think that he's never touched a microphone in his life and he's just asking like the dumbest, weirdest questions. But it makes for such a fun interview. Like him and MJF. If you haven't seen his interviews with MJF, you have to go back and seek them out. I think they're his highest rated on his entire show. He does a YouTube show and then it's a podcast as well. And I believe those are his highest rated because they're just the way that they banter back and forth, you know. They play off each other so well. Because MJF's such an elitist prick and Brandon Walker is like a schlubby hillbilly, you know. So it's a perfect mix. And he gets a wide variety of interviews too. I don't know that I could go GOAT with him, but I can certainly justify top guys for wrestling. Cornette, I'm gonna cheat a little bit here and not do these as separate, even though they are. So even though we're ranking the top 30, and these are technically separate podcasts, the Jim Cornette Experience and Corny's Drive-Thru. It's just him and Brian Last just talking wrestling, you know. So whether they're reviewing shows, they'll go through and they'll review Raw and SmackDown and AEW Dynamite and I don't know if they do Rampage or not, but they'll review the shows. They do interviews from time to time. They got a banter back and forth. Cornette now is an acquired taste, right? Like a lot of people are not gonna like Jim Cornette just because he does shit on everything all the time, constantly. If you get offended by that, then yeah, you're certainly not gonna like Jim Cornette at all. Here's how I approach Jim Cornette. I disagree often I feel like he is coming from an old lost period of time. I always talk about, if you watch my podcasts at all, if you haven't, please check out the Pro Wrestling Podcast where I just talk about highlights from all these podcasts that we're talking about here. I listen to them every week, and if something awesome happens on a show, I take out that clip and I talk about it on my show. I put it over or dog on it or whatever the case may be, do a review and commentary of that. So with Cornette, I look at it like, I feel like, and I talk about on that show often, where wrestling, I feel like split when UFC hit big. When UFC hit it big, wrestling forked. And the people that liked the believable tough guys, like the good old 70s and 80s wrestling that Cornette likes, where these are tough, burly men that take everything serious and none of this phony. It's phony. You're certainly not going to see Orange Cassidy put his hands in his pockets in any wrestling that Cornette would like, right? So I feel like that era's lost. I feel like those people that liked the realism of that went to UFC because it is real pro wrestling, essentially, is it not? If pro wrestling was a real thing, that's what it would be. I mean, they literally had a guy come out dressed as The Undertaker not that long ago with The Undertaker entrance and stuff. So, but then, on the other hand, So I feel like he's lost touch, like he hates anything that's sports entertainment, if you will, like an Orange Cassidy or something like that, but at the same time, he's such a wealth of knowledge. Like, you can't listen to him and not learn. You get a fucking master's education in professional wrestling when you listen to him talk about it, because the psychology and the fundamentals, he knows it better than anybody. I've also said this on the podcast that, like, if I had a wrestling promotion, and it sucks that Cornette won't work with anybody that he disagrees with or whatever. He thought Tony Khan was a goofy mark and didn't like where he was going with anything, so he didn't want to work with him when he was offered a job with AEW. But Cornette, to me, he would be invaluable to have on the creative team, like in my inner circle, my round table. Even if he said every single thing that I do sucks, I want to hear why he thinks it sucks, how he thinks it sucks, how he would do it better. And if I disagree because, like, say, I want to put Orange Cassidy on TV, he's going to shit on it. Okay, Jim, point taken, but going to put him out there. You know what I mean? But a lot of times I think he's going to offer a lot of value. So honestly, we're going to go like this. We're going to do them together, and I do think they're GOAT level. I would almost go with the highlights over the pods, because he also has very long podcasts. Certainly, if you're bored, you can listen to the whole thing, but I think Cornette is better digested through his YouTube clips, where you can pick out specific segments. But just for the fact that he's giving you a master's class in professional wrestling every time you listen, whether he's shitting on whatever you like and you completely disagree or not, you cannot deny, like, you're sitting under the tree of knowledge just listening to the man speak. So I certainly don't miss Cornette's opinions on much, so he's GOAT tier for me. Not Sam Wrestling. I'll tell you what, he's a little bit of a shill for WWE too. I used to love Sam Roberts. I was a big early on Sam Roberts fan. And then somewhere along the way, and it was kind of, I guess, when he started getting the gigs as working for WWE and stuff officially, he just kind of became a flat out shill for WWE. He kind of shit on AEW a lot, or took it. No, I shouldn't even say shit on, but he took more digs at AEW than he did WWE, and he could be accused for that same kind of slight. He almost, like, not a direct shot, but just kind of buries him a little bit. So just because he is a little bit shilly, he's entertaining as fuck though. Even like the stuff that he does outside of wrestling, like his morning show is great, and then he'll do like his Friday night, like Lonely Friday Nights things or that kind of stuff. He's not a top guy, but he's not a jobber, so we'll go mid with Sam. I like Sam. The Art of Wrestling recently made a comeback. I like Sam, I do. I just think he's a shill. And I think you'd agree with that. Art of Wrestling recently made a comeback, just little spot shows here and there. So I guess it's not defunct, but it was for a while. Plus, Art of Wrestling is the GOAT, right? This was I'm not talking about like my top tier GOAT, but like it's the GOAT, right? Like it was the first wrestling podcast, I do believe, other than like, you could consider Meltzer's audio shows, and Wade Keller was doing audio shows very early on. So those could be considered podcasts too. But Art of Wrestling, like wrestler hosted, insider business, interviewing other wrestlers. It's the OG, it's the king. Since then, he's been surpassed by many of these other ones. He doesn't get the best interviews anymore. And you know what? Like, Colt bugs me a little bit too. He comes off as a little bit judgy if you listen to the way he talks about people. He has little sleight of hand comments, little slights. I feel like he's just a little judgy in the way that he talks about people from time to time. So he bugs me a little bit, and I don't think he gives the best interviews either. But he's had, like, that one that he did with Punk broke the internet, right? So, shit. I think because he has had such record-breaking interviews, and he is the one who started it all. Whoa, my fat thumb's on. Oh, I put him in the Drizzling Shits. No. I think we gotta go... Shit, I almost gave him GOAT because of just being the legend, but because it doesn't really run much anymore, and he's doesn't do the best interviews regularly. We'll go top guys. I would say it's a mid podcast at best, but because it's got that infamous Punk episode, a couple other big episodes in its history, and because it was the one that started it all, he deserves a little bit of a bump up for that. So we'll put him in top guys. Foley is pod. Oh man, this is kind of new, so there's not a lot to go off of. Foley's a good storyteller, though. Like the way he's a better storyteller than just about anybody, to be honest with you. And he's kind of fine-tuned it because his whole stand-up, it's not really a comedy thing, but his little stand-up thing that he's been on tour doing for years and years now, he's probably done hundreds of them by now. You refine your ability to tell stories, because that's all he does is tell his stories, and he learns how to tell them and build the anticipation, and like really, he's just good. He's the man. You know what I mean? Plus the books that he's written. So I would say, even though there's not a lot to go off of, and they're not necessarily newsworthy, you gotta the man's gonna tell you a story. He's gonna be fascinating to listen to. There's not a lot to go off of right now. So right now, let's stick him in the mid card. He's mid. Grillin' JR. Ooh. You get a lot of red ass JR on here. If you listen to this, his podcast, you get the red ass JR. That's the thing over there where he gets really grumpy and irritable. He likes to pick fights with fictitious internet people that said things that were never actually said out loud. Like he invents things that people say on the internet in his head, and then he yells at the clouds about them. But it's great, that's what JR does, God, that's a hard choice. And JR doesn't hold back either. His podcast, he's going to give it to you straight. He's not a BSer, You're not going to get a line of shit. You're going to get it straight. If not with a side of grumpy. It can be a little bit long and dry and boring. He's not the most exciting person in the world, but he's very well-traveled and experienced and just smart as all fuck. You know what I mean? I would say if you're looking... Oh, it depends, man. Are we talking just like an every week must listen? Yeah, I mean, that's the way you gotta go, right? So... I'll put him in the mid card as well. It's worth dipping in and like throw him a subscribe, and then like when it comes up, you can see like, oh yeah, that one looks interesting, or that one's skippable, because nobody cares about fucking No Mercy 2003. You know what I mean? Who cares? Skip that one. But sometimes, like he's got a lot of, and he'll talk current events at the beginning of the show too, so that's always worth giving him a listen, at least just even for the first half hour or so, just kind of, if there was a pay-per-view or something, he'll talk about that. And like I said, he doesn't hold back, so he says it like it is. Sassafras. The Extreme Life of Matt Hardy. This one is actually really good. I'm not a huge Matt Hardy guy, and as of late, I'm not a big Jeff Hardy guy either, but this is one where and it took me a couple weeks. I didn't even listen to it right away when it first came out, but I'm kind of now at the point where he's earned my ear on this one, and I think he should earn yours too if you're not listening, because Matt Hardy is very well spoken. He's also a good storyteller, and he's honest and open. It's not like I'm gonna shoot, or he doesn't hold back, like in a way like Eric Bischoff or anything like that. It doesn't come from that kind of place. It comes from a vulnerable place almost. Like, he's an open book, man. Like, and they really go deep on, when they pick a topic, they go into it, and he'll tell you how he was feeling and the backstage stuff and all of that. They really go the extra mile. So I really think if you're gonna listen to like any kind of deep dive, and it's short, it doesn't meander for 3 hours or anything like that. I just think you're gonna be fascinated by Matt Hardy. Not every topic that he's gonna talk about is gonna be interesting. Again, it's the Backlash No Mercy 2012. Nobody cares, right? So to a certain extent, you're going to run into that, but there's also going to be like, he did an episode on Bray Wyatt, and it was just fucking, you're glued to it. It's so fascinating. I recommend going to seek that one out, especially. It's getting thick here on the mid card, but I just don't know that I could put Matt as like a top guy. He's not your top tier wrestling podcast, but it's really good. Like, when it's good, it's good. The ones that are good are good. We're getting close to the end here. We're on our final rung. Wrestling with Freddie. This one's like it's got seasons apparently. I don't know. He's on a podcast network. It's like a Latino entertainment podcast network, and he does like the wrestling show on there or something like that. So they go in seasons apparently. So he'll be back, but he's currently not doing anything active, but he just finished up maybe a month ago or so. And I actually really liked these. Like, he's also very raw, and he'll go in depth on, he'll pick like an angle. Like, he did a really good one on Dolph Ziggler, because he was like basically in charge of like the entire presentation of Dolph Ziggler to start with, and he talks about how he was so outspoken about, his name sucks and this and that and the other thing, and how he was shut down. And then he'll also he got into a good story about Michelle McCool and how he made her cry and he felt bad, and then she got Undertaker involved and got a storyline changed that he had written for her, and like a lot of fun stuff like that. Plus he does interviews. Honestly, like, I'm going to put that in the top guy. I think if you're sleeping on Wrestling with Freddie, like, I always listened every single week, and it was always a little bit different, a different storyline or a different deep dive on a guy or an interview. Just great shit. Speaking of great shit, you will not find a better interviewer than Chris Van Vliet. He's such a, like, He's got such like a professional TV look and feel and presentation to him, but he's also like able to dive deep on people and really pull out like really fascinating interviews. He's good at fascinating interviews. Mostly wrestling, but he does do other stuff. Honestly, I gotta throw Chris Van Vliet's Insight podcast on G.O.A.T. If you're sleeping on that one, if you haven't heard of it or haven't heard it or just not sure what to think or whatever, he just gets the best interviews, and he gets great names, and he does great interviews. They're fascinating. There's no other way to do it. He's got a way of bringing out the inner, just bringing out a deep conversation out of people and doing it in a professional way. And he's so likable. Keeping it 100. This, like Cornette and them, they have a very contrarian opinion, and I think that's their shtick. It's Conan and Disco Inferno, and like some other guy or a couple other guys. I don't know. Jeez, what to say about this one? It's long, a little bit, and they're very contrarian. But unlike Cornette, they don't offer the nuggets. They just kind of sound like a bunch of haters. And if you agree with them, like if you're one of those people like a Cornette fan where you think like say everything AEW does is the drizzling shits, then you're going to be like, yeah, these guys are spitting truth, yo. You know, they're speaking my language. So certainly there could be that. But to me, they're just a bunch of haters. Their podcast, it's always negative. They're never putting anything over, talking about how good anything was. Everything sucks or everything's meh, and they're bitching at each other and yelling. And I don't know. It's a certain acquired taste, but it's certainly not for me. Oof. Are they the drizzling shits though? Are they that bad? I'm going to throw them in Jobber. That's a Jobber podcast for sure. The Kurt Angle Show. That one might be controversial. You guys might be like, there's going to be the contrarians out there that like to listen to all the trash talking and the haters hating. Haters hating on, you know what I mean? A little bit of that's fine, but it doesn't need to be the whole just negative. Kurt Angle Show. Kurt... He gets a lot of good interviews, actually. I think he's such a likable, legendary personality that he always gets the top talent for his podcasts to like interview and stuff. His started out, it was started out in a Conrad format where Conrad would just pick his brain about stuff. But somewhere along the way, it morphed into like an interview show. And I think Kurt just maybe likes that version better. And since Conrad's dropped out, I don't know if there's any heat there or anything like that. It's just Conrad's got a bajillion pods and a lot to do. So the other guy, I forgot his name off the top of my head, but the other guy that helps out a lot, he fills in when Conrad's out, that guy. He does it with Kurt. And they have a good chemistry and stuff. And they do good interviews. I just listened to one he did with Adam Cole today, actually. But his interviews are very like paint by numbers, and you can even tell Kurt's got them like pre-written. I don't know if he wrote them himself or somebody helps him, the dude there writes him and then Kurt just asks, but he's very like, so Adam Cole, tell me about your first time into professional wrestling. It's like, oh geez, Kurt, don't ask anything too crazy there. But he gets good people. We'll throw it in. We'll throw him in the mid. Swerve City. He gets wrestling talent on. This is Swerve Strickland's podcast. It hit my radar when he had Tony Khan on, so that was a big get. So he'll have wrestlers on, but it's him and his buddies sitting around. And they talk a lot of other stuff like music and things like that. I'll make quick work of this one because I really don't listen to it all that much. But I did cover it when Tony Khan was on. I don't want to say it was the Drizzling Shits because they're not. It is to me, though. We'll put it on Drizzling Shits. Their audio quality is a little meh. There's a bunch of dudes just sitting around talking. It's not for me. I would say there's probably a good audience for it. It's just not my audience. And he doesn't suck, but he's not going to, like, impress you either. He's not Chris fucking Jericho quality of pod or Chris Van Vliet quality of podcasting. You know what I mean? He swerves a little meh for me. So, speaking of meh, I won't even waste your time. My world is going to be a big drizzling shits. Fuck Jeff Jarrett. I have a no Jeff Jarrett rule on my podcast. I tried my best to listen to Jeff Jarrett as long as I could for the sake of my podcast, the Pro Wrestling Podcast. I mean, it's fun to listen to all these podcasts. I do it because I listen to them anyway, so I might as well talk about them. But Jarrett became very hard to listen to, not just because he's long and stuff, but he just bugs me as a person. We're very oil and water. Jeff, I feel, again, Jeff's one of those people that, like, I feel like he talks, he's a little, I feel like he's fake. I feel like his niceness is fake. I feel like you can hear him take little jabs that are subtle, and you know, you would have to, I only notice them because they're so subtle that you only notice them because he does it so much, where he'll take a little jab at somebody, and I can't even think of a perfect example off the top of my head, but I just think he's ingenuine, and I think there's a little bit of a uptightness or egotistical or just a douchebaggery to him. There was an episode that sealed the deal for me where he yelled at Conrad about the questions, and Conrad pushed back a little bit, and Jeff just fucking made a complete ass of himself. It was great entertainment, but it was really cringy, very cringy, and showed a weird side of Jeff that I feel like is always there, and that's why I get that ingenuine in his niceness. He tries to come off as a kind southern gentleman, but he's smarmy, and he's but he yelled at Conrad one time, and it was something about the researcher, you know, this kind of questions that you're going to be asking me, and like, I wasn't prepared for, you know, fuck off, man. Like, oof, what a douchebag. So yeah, he's the Drizzling Shits. Fuck Jeff Jarrett. I'll never cover his show on my show ever, unless it's like, there'll be an exception to the rule at some point. He'll make some kind of major news where I'd be, you know, being a podcast that talks about wrestling podcasts, I would be a fool to not cover that particular topic because it was the biggest news of the week. And why am I not talking about it when I cover these things? So at some point, I'm sure he'll cross my radar again, but I actively avoid him. The New Day. I love these guys. They're on hiatus right now for obvious fucking reasons. Big E's not doing any kind of podcasting, so they're doing like a lot of their replays and stuff like that, best ofs. But when they were on, dude, they would do some really fun stuff. They would do like not tiers like this, but they would do like tournament rankings, you know, like did one where they picked the best toys of all time, you know, and they had full like tournament brackets, so, you know, where like this toy went up against, you know, the Red Wagon versus Monopoly board, and like they had to decide which one was better, and each one they narrowed it down to the best toy ever, and they did that for like a couple different things, and it was just, these guys together are so fucking entertaining. I don't know that I'll go GOAT level with them, and because they're not currently active with new content, I could go mid, but I think we all know the reasons why they're not currently active, and when they're on like a motherfucker. So I'm gonna put these guys as top guys. New Day is the shit. Speaking of top guys and great interviews, man, I feel like I sampled this dude a lot, Sean Ross Sapp. I'm going to go ahead and throw him in the GOAT, give him my props now. If you're just out looking for great wrestling interviews, I want a good interview. Look at my top tier here. Chris Jericho always has great interviews. Cornette doesn't, but he's a genius. But Chris Van Vliet, his Insight podcast, and now Sean Ross Sapp with Fightful, when he gets interviews, he gets big time interviews on a regular basis. And he gets the scoops, he gets the news, he gets the dirt. This is the guy that's breaking a lot of the news in the business on a regular basis. So you're also going to get like just recap shows, and you're going to get news shows. A lot of it he puts behind a paywall, which is annoying as fuck. But when he gets on with his boss, the guy that like the owner of Fightful or whatever, that guy will get Sean to talk about a lot of like the news stuff that's normally behind the paywall. So he's a very top tier elite podcaster, and not so much in the form of just doing a podcast, but just like his reviews and his interviews, they're the best you're gonna come across. So for that, I'll throw him in GOAT. Which brings me to Denise Salcedo, who is often on the Fightful podcast. She's a guest host with him often. That's how I discovered her. And then she's also does guest work with Wrestling Observer's network. So she's a little freelance podcaster out there. And then she's also got her own Instinct Culture here. She gets a lot of interviews lately too. She seems to be getting herself pretty well connected, getting a lot of good interviews. To me though, she's fun. She's spicy. She's brings a lot of energy. She's very hyped. To me, that can be a twinge overbearing at times. And I also feel like her questions are. I feel like she puts. I don't want to say that this isn't her. Don't get me wrong. I just feel like she puts on like a character where she tries to be overly professional or overly bubbly or nice or smiley all the time. Not that she's fake, but she just has to be very turned on. And so I'm very excited to see you today and meet you today. And let's just jump right into it. And like, she needs to like maybe just settle into herself a little bit, chill out a little. I don't know. I mean, because I used to, when I first started my podcast, like I was very like, because I'm a little bit in character, not like, like you're turning yourself up a little bit, you're trying to entertain at the same time. You don't want to be a boring ass Eric Bischoff or anything. She just, she's a little over the top sometimes. And I feel like her questions are kind of softball too all the time. She doesn't really get into the dirt, though she has from time to time. I should step that back a little bit. She got a good interview with Joey Janela where he talked about his contract status and stuff. I wouldn't go top. She's working her way up there, though. She's somebody to keep your eye on. I think Denise Salcedo is going to be around a long time, and she's going to do a lot of great work in her wrestling journalist career. But right now, she's mid. All right. Sorry, just talking, Where are we at here? Oof. Just over, getting close to an hour here, so let's see here. We're close to finishing up anyway. I always, like, when I did my review of Blood and Guts from in person, I did not expect that. I wanted to go no more than an hour, but even a half hour would have been fine. But then I end up going like an hour and a half, so like, I don't know. I don't want to like talk your ear off, but I don't want to rush through. I want to give everything their proper ends here. We got 30 podcasts. I want to acknowledge them all and give them their props or unprops. The Sessions, formerly Oral Sessions with Renee Paquette. We all know Renee Young, if you're not familiar for some reason. Renee Young from WWE. We all know how talented she is just from like the Talking Smack show, especially was fire. But like all her pre-show stuff that she was doing as well. So we all know Renee is very talented as like just a personality. She can turn it on for like the TV. She can be the professional, but she's also got this very. And she said it before, too, that she thinks everybody kind of looks at her as, like, her sister. Their sister. Like somebody was trying to get her to do, like, bikini shots and stuff like that. And she's like, no, I don't think, even though she's hot and people would want to see it. But she's like, I don't think people want to see it because, I'm like everybody's sister. And she really is. She brings that. She's chill. Like, she'll do podcasts now in, like, her house clothes, like a fucking she did her interview with Moxley wearing some sort of like just house lounge suit with like her hair in a bun. She's just chilling and like just relaxed, she's turned off. She's not on like host mode, she's very like just chilling, having a conversation with us and having a conversation with whoever she's interviewing. And she's one who gets big interviews. She gets big interviews, and she will go in depth. She gets into the dirty details. Not that she's like a a muckraker. You know, she's not getting into the dirt of things just to be scandalous. She's doing it because having that like sisterly vibe. She's like the girl that you go to talk to about everything, you know, like for dudes you may have like a girl that you go to talk to about like your girlfriend, or like you know, she's like your friend that's a girl, you know, like you're not trying to hit on her or anything like that. She's like the girl that you open up to and you tell your feelings to, and like that people are just comfortable talking to, you know. Renee's got a very she's friendly and she's comfortable. You trust her, which I think is very important. You know, she doesn't, you know, people trust her to open up, and people tell her shit. She gets the dirt in a lot of these interviews. You know, like Dax Harwood opens up about his you know, having issues with his body and that kind of thing, and like bulimia at some point. You know, she gets those kind of raw conversations out of people. She got Mox, as awkward as that was, being her husband and stuff too. She got him to open up about rehab and alcoholism. She's GOAT level. You gotta listen to the sessions. She's not gonna hit it out of the park every time with the guests, and some of them I've never even heard of or don't care about, you know, like the non-wrestling ones, but she's up there for a great interview as well. Something to Wrestle. Another one of the, you know, been around so long, but Bruce is gone a lot and they had to do a lot of rescheduling and stuff. I don't know how that's going to work with now him assuming talent relations as well. Jesus. But his banter with Conrad and all that stuff, like the OG first couple years of this podcast were great. Now half of it's 3 hours long. Half of that is commercials. Bruce isn't there half the time. They're doing rewinds and revamps and stuff. As a legacy pod, as like the one that really, like, man, when that came out, nobody was really doing like the insider. Like, there were shoot interviews and stuff, and people were talking about the backstage stuff, but Bruce was Vince's right-hand man, you know? And though Bruce does hold back, he does bullshit from time to time, I think, you know, just his expert knowledge, what it was at the time, you got to throw it in Top Guys. It's not a GOAT anymore. I think it's lost that status. I think at one point in time you would say it was the GOAT for sure. I just don't think it's there anymore, but I don't think you could fairly put it lower than that just because of what it is still to a certain extent. Oh, I think this is an old cover. I think they updated since then, but Talking Shop, we'll throw that in Jobber Pod. Just because, you know, it's with the Good Brothers, and I think Rocky Romero's on there often too. They're fun to listen to. It's fun, like it's like you're hanging out with them, you know, and you're talking shit, and they talking shop, you know, and they're drinking and whatever. But they often talk over each other, you know. It's often like a couple of like drunk dudes hanging out, like bullshit, you know, at a bar or fucking out in the garage or something like that. It doesn't gets to be a little bit much. So, but there's also a lot of good stuff and funny and entertaining stuff. So it's worth listening from time to time. It's just not like a heavy hitter in the podcast world or anything like that. Not a must listen. And to be the man, the fucking 12th iteration of Ric Flair's podcast. He started out with Conrad doing a podcast before Conrad even had one with Bruce Pritchard. And that one didn't really go anywhere, you know, because Rick was very inconsistent about his podcasting. Then he had one with Mark Madden. He came back, he wanted to do one with Mark Madden, and then that one didn't even last, only lasted a couple months, and then they broke up, and they got into a big feud that was public. I covered that on the Pro Wrestling podcast as well. You can go back and check out the clips of there. It was actually my highest viewed clips ever. 31,000 views on that one. To Mark Madden and Ric Flair beef. And Mark Madden went and talked on the Conan's podcast about How hard it was to work with Rick and how inconsistent Rick was, and all the same shit that Conrad had even said about the first run that he had with him. But now all of a sudden he's back with Conrad, and even now, well, they took a hiatus because Rick's having his last match or whatever. Hope that goes well for him. But just in general, I don't know that this one's going to have a lot of steam. And Rick's not that good of a podcaster. Conrad hosts it now. So if anybody can get good content out of Rick, it's Conrad. They try to switch it up to keep Rick interested, because he used to get really bored with some of the interview content. So now they do interviews, they do deep dives, they do ask anythings, they do watch alongs, all that, anything to keep Rick engaged. I'm gonna put that at a jobber level pod. Every once in a great while it might be worth watching, but I don't even really like Ric Flair as a person, to be honest with you, anymore. And he's not that great of a podcaster, but Conrad is, and he pulls a little something out of him, so that's where we'll leave it. All right, well, that is the tier list as it sits. That's very interesting. 30 podcasts, from greatest of all time to the Drizzling Shits, and that's kind of how they pan out. Thick in the middle, as usually the case. More in the GOATs than I thought there would be, but very cool. I had fun doing that. I will probably try to think of other little tiers to do and throw those out as just bonus content from time to time, just to amuse myself, really. So I'm going to go ahead and save that into the tier maker. I think those on that website, then it becomes like a public thing that you can search up. And then you guys, I think you can create your own too. So anyway, yeah. Comment down below if you have your own opinions or anything else you wanted to add or thought I missed or anything that I completely fucked up. Open to your input, and I appreciate you guys hanging out with me and doing this tier ranking, and we will catch you on the next. Peace, love, and pizza. I am your boy Seth Grimes. Like, follow, and subscribe down below, and we'll catch you on the next one. Peace.